All right, this is video number 3 to go through part 5. The first couple sections were about customers, understanding customer sales, order metrics, unit economics model was part 2. Then really reevaluating your media, and then optimizing revenues and COGS. This part is on subscription businesses. And as I said, you should read this even if you don't consider yourself a pure subscription business. The reality is that we all want customers to keep coming back. And so there are a lot of things here that do apply, like onboarding, packaging, product. But also there are some metrics and some ways of looking, especially on the reporting side, but also just on things when you do have an active subscription that are a little bit more particular. So, but I do think there are some things that apply everyone, and it's worth carving out. So, as I said, it's just a sampling of where you can and should focus. There's obviously a ton here within each one of these. The work involved can be pretty meaningful. So, each one of us has to do a little bit of work around understanding where we think the perceived value and level of effort is and ROI is, right? But certainly important to start walking through each of these. So first up, onboarding. Customers need to be brought along. I think oftentimes we assume and expect that customers buy, they know what it is they're doing, and they kind of should be able to figure things out. But, as I said, what do you want them to do? If you were literally hand holding them, what kinds of things do you want to emphasize? If it was a friend of yours, if you were, in person with them, what kinds of things would you call attention to, whether it's about your product, about your community, about really what are the things that they should be aware of? Certainly also, what kinds of problems do people typically have with your product or with your service? And whether it's, putting things into, on the buy page, on the sell page, to the extent it doesn't hurt conversion, but it's also not being, getting careful about what you communicate when. But certainly via email, FAQs, packaging, certainly looking at what are people's complaints around that you hear from customer service, on reviews, on social, on Amazon, wherever. And some of those things can be addressed via onboarding. And really, you've got to figure out how to impress your customer. There is a huge amount there, and I'm going to get into probably the next video around creating incredible customer experiences. One area to kind of mention, or one site really, it's a site called User Onboard. It's free. It's by far, it's probably the best resource I've ever seen when it comes to onboarding. It is focused a little bit more on SaaS and media businesses, but there's just a ton of content in there, and they're really kind of, I don't even know who owns and runs it, but whoever is, they'll walk through onboarding from purchase to when you get the product and service and when you start using it. And I think it's a good reminder that onboarding doesn't happen after someone has purchased. It happens from the outset, really just like customer experience does, right? So again, it's a free product or free service. You go look at it. They have what they call teardowns of each of them, and I've been really impressed with how much information and how much good information is in there. Packaging. So I can't say here, is packaging going to double your business? Perhaps yes. If you're alcoholic or beauty brand, but the reality is the answer is no. It's not going to double your business, but it's an important part of making a good first impression. And all these things add up over time. And certainly every business has to be mindful of who their customer is, what they value. Some businesses actually being a little bit more shoddy and not as beautiful is actually important. If people are buying something on a discount and you're trying to say they're getting a ridiculous value, and if the packaging is ridiculously nice, they're going to potentially question, why are you spending so much? Why don't you give me some more savings? But each business and each product, there are no rules and there's no perfect, but certainly it's about what's going to impact the customer. As I say here, what box, when you think about your own experience, what are you impressed by? What box, when it shows up, brings you joy, smile, excitement? And so, at the very lowest bar, don't be bad, but, just get better. Again, each business, we have priorities. And so depending on where you are in the stage, it may not be something you get to right away, but just know that things do add up, and all these littles do add up and reflect on your business. Product. It seems so darn obvious to say product, but when I talk about customer experience and really building a brand, for me that really means that you care about your product and you care about your customer. And really, it's about, do you show it? And so not everything is fixable right away. Sometimes it's time, it's dollars, other priorities. Totally get that. But the reality is your customer probably doesn't. At the same time, it's really interesting that a lot of people, when they spend media dollars, there's clear ROI, or that's how they're looking at it. But, as I say here, sometimes like if your product is not at least good enough, and we can talk about like what the standards are, but if your product is at least not good enough, taking some of those media dollars and putting them into the product may actually be a higher ROI, at least on a marginal basis. And certainly if you have a better product, getting them, keeping them around, creating brand evangelists, way easier and frankly, way more doable. If your product sucks, and you're just playing this game of acquisition, churn, and you're trying to, do that, like, I guess I got no judgment for you other than to say that like it's going to be a lot more difficult. And certainly if you're trying to build something that's a little bit more sustainable, got success and build a brand, it's very, very hard to do that with a bad product. There are some people who have, but if you do the work and you make your product exceptionally good, it at least makes it easier. And by the way, even if it's not exceptionally good and it's just good, again, your product is what your customers are buying. And by the way, it's clearly not just that. It can be the community, it can be the experience, it can be all these other things. But, at the end of the day, there aren't that many products where customers are buying it and they don't really care. It's a pretty limited thing. So, again, I kind of feel like I beat this one up, but at the same time, there are so many people who they don't talk about the product improvements, and it's much more about the marketing side than it is actually about the actual product. Order notification. This is one of those things specifically around subscription businesses. I will say I feel very strongly that order notification is a big deal and is important. Not just from my personal experience, but you certainly can look on social and how people post and all that good stuff. But this is really about treating the customer better. And yes, I may have signed up for a subscription, but oftentimes I forget, I'm busy. That's what the customer is thinking. And so your churn absolutely will go up. There's no question about that. If you have not been sending order notifications versus you start doing it, your churn is going to go up. But first of all, it's better for the brand. It's better for the customer. And by the way, as I'm going to show in a second, there are ways to create actually a promotional opportunity with that notification. But I would just say, look at your own experience of when you've gotten a box and you forgot. And the reality is, and we'll talk about pausing and skipping shortly, it is just a better experience. And sometimes your customers do need a break. And it doesn't mean they don't like your product. It just means sometimes they're traveling, they're busy, life has gotten in the way. But I just think about it as what's a better experience for the customer, at least to let them know and give them, a couple days notice. Again, getting that brand win over time is a huge deal. So ButcherBox was one of my clients, and we put something in place that really kind of, it mirrored what Dollar Shave Club was also doing, which is there's an order notification, but then in that notification, there's an exclusive member only deal. So it's called out. It's letting people know your box is getting ready, but look at this great deal. And in this case, it was a 10-pack of bacon. But you can use these order notifications as a promotional opportunity. So you're going to lose a little bit with churn, but you can make some of that up with AOV. And again, obviously, it's kind of obvious, but these products should be related. It is a way to test out some other things, certainly as well. And it's another way to also enhance the subscriber or member experience. Is you only get these great deals if you're a subscriber, and you may decide you want to segment your list. And if you've been around for 1 month or 3 months or 6 months, they may get different things. Great, but generally to start, I don't want to overcomplicate things, but really showing the love to your subscribers and your customers. I will say this word member is intentional. Robbie Kelman Baxter wrote the book, The Subscription Economy, and talks about the difference between subscriber and member. And it may sound like semantics, but if you think about how does internally, particularly if you're calling your customers subscribers versus members, there's oftentimes a shift. Being a member of something usually connotes, something that's usually more special. And you think about what you're a member of versus what you're a subscriber of. The latter feels more transactional. The member generally feels more inclusive. So talked about retention analytics in the first video, but now let's start looking at what those are. And there are some, again, specific ones around this. So this first one is really cohort analysis, looking at number of shipments customers have gotten. So this is their first purchase. And then I'll come back to this in a second. These are the number of new customers. This is how many customers got shipment 1, got shipment 2, shipment 3, and so on. And then this is really the total. So this basically says that on average, January 2018 customers got 3.4 shipments. And again, some of the numbers that are more recent haven't had as much time. So that's where we start to look at, for the information we have, these metrics are looking pretty decent. And so, we're seeing a little bit of fall off here, relatively flat and so on. So, this is certainly this is a monthly analysis that can and should be done to see what is going on. Are there places that things are getting better and you're taking initiatives? In my experiences, if you don't have any initiatives going, generally you're not going to get better. You may get worse as you start to scale. In this case, that's not what happened. But it is something really to be paying attention to, because also this will affect your LTV models. Kind of semi-obviously, but just it's important to know here. The difference in this top and bottom section is gross and net of refund. So, this delta is, relatively small refund rate on first order. But you can see, this 3.4 goes to 3.2. So it's down, 7%, give or take, right? So, and it's just something to be mindful of. Another thing around this is not just the information, but really where are the bigger drop-offs happening, and what can you do to try to influence them? Generally earlier, not surprisingly, earlier in the customer life cycle, it's higher leverage. These kind of metrics are not unusual to see about a 30% drop-off between month 1 and month 2. So there may be things that, there are operational things, there are product things, there's messaging, there's order notification, the promotion. There are a lot of things around what is the value of being a subscriber, and what are people a part of. And really, there's got to be someone, we'll talk about this at the end of this section, someone who's got some accountability for improving retention. They may work with all the functional departments, but and not do some of the work explicitly themselves, but they should be working across the board to try to make things better. This is, one of the grounding, just like when we looked at the original order and customer metrics, we can slice and dice by, different areas. So by source, nice typo there, offer, promotion, frequency, whatever is, appropriate for your business, but looking at different cuts of this. This is, again, I'm looking at it by shipment. You can look at it by month as another way. Just, be mindful because of how you're doing it, and whether it's you or someone on your team is doing so. I talked about revenue retention. So, if you look at this table, customers, this is, January 18 customers. In the first month, they generated $734K of revenue. In their 12th month, they generated $45K of revenue. So the difference is churn, right? And, what people are ordering, and certainly some AOV differences. And, if we just did the straight thing, which we looked at on the prior slides, we see the drop, the retention. And so this is revenue retention as a percent of the first month. So sometimes, though, the reality and the absolute nature of these metrics doesn't come through. What I mean by that is, we know these numbers aren't great, 22% going down to 6%, but that's almost $700,000 delta of what we generated from these customers in month 1 versus month 12. I'm going to talk about Chewy in a second. There are very few customers where this thing stays flat or grows over time. But it also is, I think, just a good reminder of what the actual dollar impact is. Sometimes the percentages are helpful and valuable, but sometimes it's a pretty stark thing to say, hey, these customers generated $1 million month 1, they're generating 81K over 12 months later. So just to stay flat, we've got to, obviously it's stair steps, but just to stay flat, we've got to be, adding this revenue into our mix and growing the accounts. We got to replace it with more customers, things like that. And so sometimes it's a really stark realization of what's going on with the business. I'll give an example also though of customer versus revenue retention. So if this top line is number of customers who ordered, and so you can see their retention numbers just by count. If we look at the revenues those customers generated, these are slightly higher numbers, right? And so as we go through them, part of what's happening is the AOV for successive orders is going up. You would hope that would happen as the customers who stick around are spending at least as much, if not more. But it's a good sign, and it's a way to mitigate some of the loss. So if we just looked at customer retention, certainly want to improve that, but the drop off isn't as bad, which by the way isn't supposed to make us feel better. It's just about what's going on with the business. But the drop off isn't as bad on a revenue side, which frankly is more important because that's really the dollars, and that's obviously reflected in AOV. And so it's possible that one of the ways to, as much as you want to work this, that's pushing AOV, whether it's through promotions, exclusives, messaging, whatever it is, that AOV actually continues to go up, and that can help to mitigate the delta from customer retention losses. I will put a note here on Chewy. Their investors have touted that even though more than half of the monthly cohorts are no longer active purchasers 12 months later, the revenue retention was over 100% relative to month one. So what that means is essentially this 700K plus in month one is, if not at that same flat level or higher, 12 months later. So if they're losing more than half the customers over this time period, but that number has stayed flat, that means the increases on AOV are actually 2x of what they had been. Just the simple math on that, right? But that's, Chewy is an exception. I keep hearing more and more about this, and people are talking about it. The reality is the pet business is a very different one. Loyalty there is off the charts, or can be off the charts. I don't know of really any other business where this has happened, at least from a physical product side, but that's a very loyal group of customers. And, certainly there's a lot that Chewy is doing on this. It's not just their business model. Their customer service is really, really good. And how they treat their customers, they've done, I think, 5 or 6 million handwritten notes to their customers. So they certainly take care of their customer, and there's a lot of love they provide them. It is very much an outlier, but talk about something to aspire towards. And at the very least, no matter what, we all have our baseline. How do we start to improve that over time? The analysis that I kind of just went through was really post-month. So what I mean by that is you're waiting, let's say with these, you're waiting for the month to finish to know, or to, as you get more info around shipment info, for example, you're going to then populate, it's going to populate. One of the things though is, that's a little bit of a lag. So what I'd rather be able to do though is also monitor real time. And so one of the things, especially with the subscription business, we can look at is when do cancels happen? Because that can affect, obviously that's affecting, our business, but I'd rather not wait until the end of the month to find out about this, or potentially even longer. So as an example, what this shows is over these 5 months, the days after their first, let's say their first purchase, when did the cancel happen on a percent basis? So in February, 4% of the customers had canceled by day 7 after their first order. And so you see a relatively tight band here, but then all of a sudden, you see this June is very much an outlier. In these first few days, 1 or 2% doesn't look like that much, but then these numbers start to grow dramatically over time. And so over time being, a 7-day period. So rather than waiting for the end of the month, or again, as I said, even longer, if you have this intra-month reporting going on and monitoring cancels, probably that's an indicator of something that's happening. And whether it's, something's wrong with the product, with the messaging, intentional or otherwise, that's a way to monitor and try to nip things in the bud. Pause and skip. So these days, customers expect a pause and skip. If you don't provide that option, they're gonna cancel. And when they choose to do so, for sure, I'm sure they don't want to cancel because they feel like they're going to feel better about themselves and they think they're actually going to reactivate. But there are plenty of people who actually just have too much product. We oftentimes see in the cancel reasons, people say, too much product is one of the reasons they're canceling. Well, sometimes it is literally as simple as having them pause. And so I've definitely experienced that with products where I'm a big fan of. The reality is I travel, I forget, some stuff comes up, I get sick. And so what the quote unquote 30-day supply, I just can't get through it in 30 days. And so, getting product buildup is annoying. I'd rather pause it. And then, once I get through it, then I'm happy to go back and restart my subscription. But, these days pause and skip is a big deal. One of my clients just found that, of the 65% of people who skipped, they ordered again. 20% kind of stayed in this skipping mode and then 15% canceled. So it's one data point, but, it is really encouraging to see that, the reality is that 65%, likely would have canceled if pause and skip weren't an option. I will say it is at this point, it's really important to keep a regular report of the count and percent of customers in pause skip status. So when you have pause and skip, it's important to recognize that not canceled does not mean active. Just because someone isn't canceled, they may be on pause and skip. And so it may be affecting how you think about inventory management, cash flow, all those types of things. And at the same time, if you find that customers have been paused for an extended period of time, like let's say 90 days, your business, you'll probably know better. You'll obviously know better on what is considered too long. But, if you've got people who've been 90, 120 days in pause mode, at the very least, like hit them up. You don't have to necessarily give them an offer right away. Sometimes it's a matter of they just forgot. And your product and your experience should be so good that they should not want to forget. The reality is, most businesses aren't Netflix, aren't Amazon Prime. And so, these are people who have paused, they haven't canceled. And, just getting them some messaging, certainly via email, and, you can build some custom audiences within Facebook, but going back after them and asking them and trying to get them to get going again and restart their subscription. So it's just an important thing that it's great to have it, but just you got to keep track of it too. I want to kind of talk for one moment also about MeUndies. So they have one of the more unique subscriber benefit programs that I've seen. And so, ButcherBox and Dollar Shave Club offer one-time deals. It's great for an upcoming shipment. MeUndies provides two unique benefits. One is to get certain, MeUndies obviously is subscription underwear, but there are some prints and patterns and designs that are only available if you're a member. I'm going to call it member subscriber here, just to keep it simple. But, so there are certain products that you actually can't get and certain styles you can't get unless you're a subscriber, which you can argue about whether you like that or not, but it's interesting. And certainly, it seems like it's working for them. But the second part is, as long as you have an active subscription, they give their customers member pricing. And so, if it's 30 or 50% off, you get the same discount on any purchase. And, again, as long as your cost structure and your financial structure and model works, this is a really cool thing because, from one side, I can argue, do I actually need a subscription for underwear? Regardless, but if I want an extra pair, I don't want to have to wait, or, if I find something I like, or I want to buy a gift or whatever, all these things, like, those are generally pluses. Like, there's a lot of times people with these kinds of programs or a loyalty program, they're banking on breakage. You should want your customers to buy more. Just make sure that, whatever offer or benefit you're going to give them, you can hold to, and obviously it works for your model. But really, as I say here, like, why wouldn't you prefer people buying more? You may make less per, but, that's, if people are wanting to buy more, especially if they're on a subscription and they want to buy one-offs, that's generally a really good sign. So I really wanted to call them out because I don't see too many people really doing things in this way, especially with a monthly subscription service. like Amiendi, so I thought it was worth calling out. And by the way, like they are not a client of mine, so I don't have inside information other than to say like from a consumer side, and certainly it's something I'm working on with a couple clients to get this implemented. But conceptually, I think it's a really cool thing, and it's certainly it's giving customers a choice and a benefit, and probably there's a component where people look at that and they say like, yeah, it makes sense. Other people should be doing the same thing. Few more points around subscription here. So involuntary churn. First thing, do you have a process in place when a credit card declines on a recurring order? So at the very least, are you hitting customers again? Are you hitting the credit card again? I know there are programs like, and so one, that's the first thing is, these are customers who have not canceled, but because their expiration date is off, they've maxed out their credit card, certainly is a possibility, but people who have not canceled explicitly, but because the charge isn't going through, you're losing them. That is a leaky bucket. And I think everyone would agree they hate that. Generally speaking, let's say if you have a monthly subscription, you should be hitting that customer's credit card again multiple times. I don't like going beyond, 4 weeks. I think that's, if it hasn't gone through that point, they haven't called or communicated back with you to update their card. It feels a little bit, much to go beyond that period, but there's certainly nothing wrong with they haven't canceled. They're expecting, presumably if you have an order notification email, but even if not, like as long as your terms of service and all that are good, reattempting that credit card can add important dollars to your bottom line. There are, and so I would also say, being strategic about when you send a notification and how you do it. I've used Churnbuster with a bunch of clients. Recharge does does re-hit the card, and it does have an email template. The problem is you use that same email for every email, so you can't customize if it's 1 day out, 4 day out, 4 days out, 10 days out. Churnbuster provides some of that functionality, and frankly, like Churnbuster's reporting is just a ton more robust. So definitely an area. I think more people are kind of doing the re-hitting the credit card. It's kind of like retargeting. It's one of these things I think you generally got to be doing, but how you're doing it and how strategic and intentional you're being. Definitely an area for improvement and likely either improvement or to affect the business. Final thing, and this really goes certainly well beyond subscription, is you need a person who's got accountability on an area. And so, as I say here, like it's not just the one person working on it, but generally a retention marketer, someone who is looking at all these different areas, working with the different functional groups, analytics to get the information, working with sourcing and product to get that part better. What's going on with packaging, what happens on the fulfillment side, emails, communication, finance on the billing, customer service. How are people treating customers with questions who want to cancel, all that kind of stuff. So, there's a bit of liaison and project management going on here, but really someone owning this role. And I'd say certainly if you're over 25 million, this should be a dedicated role. There's generally more than enough to do on working on how do you make that experience better. First, do you have the information, and then doing, following up, doing different tests. Sometimes like you can't do pure A/B tests, and these things sometimes will overlap. But that person's role and that their KPIs should certainly be about improving retention, both at the customer level and at the revenue level. But again, across the business, if you don't have a single person who has accountability, oftentimes it gets lost. So particularly with subscription businesses, and as you get it into 8 figures, having someone assigned and that is their responsibility and they have ownership on it is a really, really important deal. So really encourage you to look at that. So that's the end of the subscription part. Again, there are tons more things we can do with subscription, but let's pause here, and then the next video will be the bonus, talking about crafting incredible customer experiences.